From Hamilton Place Strategies in Washington, D.C., this is the HPS Insights podcast.
Welcome to HPS Insights, a new podcast from Hamilton Place Strategies, analyzing the current events impacting the business and political communities. I'm your host today, Michael Steel, a partner at Hamilton Place and former spokesman for House Speaker John Boehner. Today we'll discuss how COVID-19 has upended the media landscape, especially when it comes to TV and digital streaming show appearances. Joining me for this conversation is Molly Mitchell, Director at HPS, and former Director of Media Affairs and Surrogates during the 2018 cycle at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. So let's jump right in. Molly, you want to talk a little bit about what's different right now in terms of the news and booking environment?
Definitely, and thanks so much for having me today. Obviously, just as everyone's lives have been upended, COVID-19 has totally changed at a very rapid pace the media landscape in a way that I have never seen before. A lot of different things are at play right now. The first is that a ton of airtime, and a lot of this is rightfully so, anywhere from 3 to 5 hours a day is being taken up by the Trump, task force briefing, any governor briefings, particularly right now, Governor Cuomo out of New York, that's been hit really hard by COVID-19, and then any new CDC or public health guideline announcement. So there's just a ton of oxygen being taken up by that.
I mean, the president's briefing alone was over 2 hours yesterday.
Definitely. And also, President Trump has always been a big fan of Twitter. So that has been something I think over the last 3 years we've adjusted to with clients, and that anything can happen. You can get bumped on live TV. I think until literally you're getting your first sentence out, you never know, right? That's a big thing to expectation set with people who haven't done particularly national TV before, but local TV as well. And so we sort of have adjusted to a climate where the president does take charge of the news cycle very often, and often just from a tweet that can happen. But this is definitely something else. And it's also interesting because usually when a disaster strikes, something along the lines that's horrible, like a terrorist attack or a hurricane, it affects one part of the country in particular. So you're looking at maybe the top 3 blocks, like the A block, the B block, the C block being eaten up by that, but not the entire show. And what we're seeing here is COVID is really permeating the entire shows across all cable, across all digital, pretty much 24/7. So that's a really different environment than most people are used to seeing. And then just the logistical front too. And I know you've been doing TV this week, but you're doing it often from home. You're doing it via Zoom or Skype, depending on the network. So getting prep for that. And, we have a client on from HPS who's going, on national TV later today, and how we prepped for that strategically is so much different than in other times too.
Yeah, and it affects the logistics on both ways with kind of these news events happening a lot of time every day, and also somewhat unpredictable times. The event announced, the briefing announced for 5 p.m. may not start until 5:30. I mean, I was on an MSNBC show last weekend where we kind of had to fill time for half an hour just because the president was late. And he wasn't late because anyone was doing anything wrong. It was just they have a lot of information to gather. They have a lot of people doing important work that they have to get together in front of the camera. So these things are kind of inherently unpredictable.
I think that's actually a great point, the timing being so different, because it cuts both ways, right? Where you need to be really well prepared if you're a guest, that you may only speak once or twice, particularly if you're a panel, because at any moment they could cut to something else, so that you've really honed in on your core message, what we would call an elevator pitch that takes 30 seconds to get out about why you're on TV or you're on the show and what you're trying to communicate to the audience. But the other flip side is too, if you're waiting to react to something, whether it's a bill passing in Congress or the president's briefing, you may have to vamp, being really prepared. I think anyone who's ever going on cable should always, you don't have to have all of the news memorized, but you need to have read whatever national paper you would like to, or whether it's a podcast in the morning, so that you're up to speed before you're on a show, because anything can happen and you may have to respond to that in real time. And I think that's a really good point to sort of hone in on with clients as they're ready, getting ready to go on.
Yeah, you've got to be able to communicate the message that you want to get across in the 15 or 20 seconds that you may get, but you also need to be able to fill 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of airtime with the help of the host and other panelists, because things are so fluid right now. Mm-hmm. I think it's also worth talking about how tone is so important in this environment. Things that are interesting or important in normal times are just not relevant right now, as people are dealing with this unparalleled public health crisis. And so when you're talking about pitching people to these bookers, to the shows, what's top of mind for you in terms of what's relevant and important right now?
Sure. And I think what's first and foremost top of mind for me, particularly, I've worked with producers and bookers for several years now, is starting, notes, or whether I'm calling people, just asking how they are. Everyone's being affected by this, and you have no idea what's going on with people. I mean, this is true. I think everyone should be gracious and kind all the time, but particularly now, I think that goes a long way. And in a genuine way, to make sure that they're doing okay. I deal with a lot of folks out of New York, which has been the hardest. So I think acknowledging that it is a bizarre time and hoping that they're well and safe is a good way to start those conversations. And then after that, I think I always stress it's got to be concise. These people get inundated with thousands of emails. They don't have a lot of time, but cut to the chase, right? Acknowledge the situation, be gracious, but then also say, here's what's going on with COVID. I know that you are bombarded from all sides to get people on. Here's why this is really important given the context of the pandemic. And if you can't come to an answer to that in about 30 seconds, you should not be going on national TV right now. I think we definitely have clients who should be a part of the conversation,
and who are
right, and who are, and there are other people who shouldn't be right now. Now this won't last for forever. I do think we have a couple more weeks. And I would leave the predictions, obviously, to people with MD after their name, but we have not flattened the curve yet, and once that occurs, it'll be a whole different window, and a different landscape. But until then, if you're not critical, touching some way, whether it's small business relief to employees or, people working or companies working on the actual response, I think you need to really give pause to what you're doing if you're trying to go on TV.
Well, and your mention of MDs brings up another thing that's eating up a lot of time right now, is that, people want to hear from medical authorities. And so in addition to the president's briefing, in addition to the governor's briefings, we're seeing a lot of public health experts and doctors, people in white lab coats on television talking about either their experiences on the front line addressing this epidemic, or their knowledge, their wisdom about public health and dealing with this sort of crisis. So it's another thing that squeezes the time available for people who aren't either government officials or doctors even further.
It does. And I do think too, if you're in an organization that has anyone with medical expertise, now that's relevant to this, of course, and you have to assume that the tone makes sense and everything else, but that if they are in a position to be spokespeople, I would definitely put them first in line. I think it's someone who has an MD after their name and is a credible source. And you can be honest with the producers and bookers, and, you don't have to, whatever their specialty is, right? Which it may not be an ophthalmologist, on the front lines of COVID, but if they've gone through medical school and are practicing, that is relevant now because they can speak to the unique set of circumstances that the industry finds itself in. And I think that's a good option if that's something in your wheelhouse to use.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the balance is you need something that's relevant, that taps into COVID-related experience in some way, but doesn't seem self-serving, doesn't seem self-promotional, like you're in any way taking advantage of this horrible epidemic.
And I would say too, to PR folks out there who are pitching, trust your gut. If you feel this is the time to really be a partner to your clients and give them the full scoop of why you think X or Y is really important, or Z they should hold on for right now. I think, if you're in the media landscape, or if you've worked in television before, you understand what's happening. I mean, I love cable news. I'm constantly wired to it, and you are the expert. So make sure that you're really helping them through this, because it's much better to tell a client, I don't think that is correct right now for these reasons, instead of them doing something and then, the audience or just external stakeholders not really responding positively to it.
Yeah, a big and important part of the job is advising people not to do things. It's not always to try and insert yourself in a conversation that is not really helpful that way.
Definitely.
Well, let's pause for a moment and take a break, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Hamilton Place Strategies is an analytical public affairs firm based in Washington, D.C. Learn more at hamiltonplacestrategies.com or follow us on Twitter at HPS Insight.
Welcome back, everybody. As we confront this unique crisis, we also need to think about kind of the practical matters, or the practical impact when you're doing a media appearance after you've decided that it's relevant, decided that it's smart. This is a really different look and feel and experience than you're used to if you're used to doing media appearances in the usual environment. So usually you have a car service pick you up. They take you to the studio. You have makeup with the makeup experts with the lights and the mirrors and all of that. They're a little paranoid about making sure you're there on time. So frequently you've got to be there like 30 minutes before you're hit. And then you clean the makeup off afterwards and take the car service home or back to your office. And the whole thing, it's crazy to think that a 2 or 3 or 5 minute cable TV hit usually takes about an hour and a half out of your day, depending on how far you are from the studio. And so, one of the big advantages to doing media in this environment is that, we've all got our laptops in our living rooms already, and it's just a matter of, tuning into the Skype or whatever platform the network is using and started talking. But Molly, you've got a lot of thoughts on how you should present yourself, the look, the feel, what you should still be doing, even if you're, essentially talking to your own laptop with your pajamas on.
Definitely. And I think I differ a little bit from you, Steel, only in that I love to keep the beautiful work that they have done, the glasses on for as long as possible.
My wife actually gets upset with me for wiping it off because she says I look so much better when I'm on TV.
And it's a sad time that, we can't have that extra, filter before going on TV. But I definitely, it's a pro con about the time, because it does take a lot of time. It can definitely take up to 90 minutes. And for women in particular, it can take even longer, because there is usually a little bit more hair and makeup involved, depending on the show. And of course, the tone that the spokesperson is trying to hit. And I think that you definitely, if you're a veteran, you would feel like you need less time, given that there's no car to the studio, waiting in the green room and all of that. But I would still strongly recommend that you're blocking at least 30 minutes before to make sure you're set up and ready to go. And I would say 30 minutes before whatever time the producer sets up with you to go over the audio and make sure that's tested. I think you just want to really get yourself in a place where you feel good, the shot feels normal, you've adjusted to what you're looking at. I think for most people, I recommend if you're in a flash studio, so that's a little closet, it's often very cold, in a studio, and you're looking at a camera, that they turn it off so that they're not distracted to look at themselves on delay. This is an interesting thing where I would definitely keep your eyes glued to your camera on your laptop. And same advice that I give, I think applies now. Picture someone you're close with, that you love to have great conversations with. For me, that's my mom. That could be a friend, a partner, a spouse. And just sort of envision them there in that green dot and get really used to talking to that. And I think that 30 minutes before is a good time, but just there's a lot more checklist. When I'm in a studio, the thing I think about is my phone off, right?
Right.
You got to worry about your phone, your watch, your dog, your cat, your husband, whoever else is with you.
You don't want to wind up like the guy on BBC with his kid wandering into the middle of the shot.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's a real issue right now.
Right. So, you still, I think you do need a little bit of time. And then the lighting and the angles, I think, are the big thing, as Drake would sing about with the angles. I think that that's a really important thing to think about. I would make sure that it's at least level with your face.
The camera, yeah.
The camera, right. That's a good point. Not necessarily the laptop, sort of depends. You'll have to try this out at home. And I always prefer photos at least taken a little higher up,
right,
which I would also recommend for this. So just like a couple inches above to get, it's just a better look for everyone, right? That downward angle.
Yeah.
So you're not craning your neck,
And you see so many of these guys who clearly have the computer sitting on their desk, and it looks like you're getting the cat box's eye view of a guy looking into a cat box. I mean, it's just terrible.
Right. So getting the angle set up, and then really the lighting, as much. And it's weird because it's not really natural light you'd want, because that can go in and out, which can also look weird, but a lot of lighting behind you and particularly above you, if that's feasible. If you're someone who's going to be doing this a lot, there are really good sort of selfie rings that you can buy on Amazon that attach to your laptop or your phone. They're like $20 or less. So I think, if this is something that you see yourself doing, or you just want to look particularly well lit for your Zoom meetings during your day, I think that's a really smart purchase to make. But it is really just the light and the angle, and then because those are things I think you can control. A lot of other things.
The light, the more the better, right? Like just you basically want as much, every lamp in the room on, every overhead on, all of that.
And this is a fun fact I learned many years ago as a Morning Joe intern when I was at 30 Rock and they were giving studio tours, was that the lights are the most expensive thing, and there are so many of them. And that's why whenever you've been in a studio and you're like, why am I freezing? It's because they keep it that way, because if not, the lights literally would raise the studio temperature. That's how many and how strong they are. So yes, everyone looks great on TV because of the makeup, but a lot of it is just the lighting too. So you can't be overstated.
And you think that people, even if they're broadcasting from home, really need some amount of makeup, right?
100%. I am a very, very pale person. And so particularly, yes, I think for men, at a bare minimum, any like pressed powder, right? Just because of shine and oil. And I don't know if anyone has ever seen the broadcast news clip, but you want to avoid looking like you're profusely sweating, if at all possible. If you wanted to go one step above that and you're comfortable with this, I would definitely recommend a little bit of bronzer for men too, and I think with that, you're good to go. There's nothing else. For women, I would just say whatever basic level of makeup you'd put on, and I would maybe just a little bit darker, with the bronzer, just be given that you're going to be on television, but just basic mascara, and that I think is all good. If you're on the paler side, like I am, I'm half Irish and Czech and very pale, more is better. I think you can look a little clownish to yourself, but it won't look that way. And you can just test it out. Just look at yourself, when you're on Zoom and Skype, and you'll be able to see. I think that's the best way. Anytime I've had a makeup or a dress mishap, it's after, when you're looking at the, you notice that. So that's kind of the pro of this, is that you can sort of see for yourself how it will look ahead of time. But yeah, if you can make it work. Now, I will say with the makeup and in regards to dress code, it's a different time. Right. So you don't need to look like you're going to a beauty pageant, and you don't need to be in a ball gown, and I think it is one of those times where, given the subject matter, if you are going to be in just like a half zip and then otherwise look pretty professional and in jeans, that is okay. I don't think you necessarily need to be in a full suit for these types of things.
Yeah. I would also probably, if you're not habitually bearded, you can probably shave the Corona beard and Do your best to tame the hair. The rule I was told years ago was that you generally are expected to match the way the host is dressed, right? So if the host is in a coat and tie, you should be in a coat and tie. Actually, for outdoor shots, I was also told you should kind of match how they're dressed for the weather. So if they're wearing an overcoat, you wear an overcoat. But in this case, I think everyone sort of expects Chuck Todd and Jake Tapper and Wolf Blitzer to still be wearing neckties. I don't think anyone expects you to go down, put on a necktie sitting in your living room talking to your laptop. I mean, it looks a little unnatural, it looks a little forced, but pajamas are also not a very good idea. You need to look professional. You're on TV because you have something important to tell viewers. Look like a serious person.
Yeah, and it's a visual medium. So if you've never worn something before, I would wear it before you wear it on TV, so you know what it feels like. I mean, some of this seems very intuitive, but if you haven't done it before and you haven't thought it through, it is a good time just to kind of go through those basics. The other thing I would also highlight is that because we're doing this all via Skype and Zoom, they are looking to cut away from you, not because they're not happy with however the end product is, but just because it's not obviously ideal TV. So if you're going on and there's any photos, stats, B-roll that you can send that they will put up on the screen, producers and the graphic folks will be so grateful to you. So that's something I think to really think through too. Is what's kind of nice about this is you kind of get to help the producers with the visual elements of your package. So just making sure you're thinking through that too. And even if there's just some stats you're going to share, they can turn that in to a nice looking graphic on their end. So people are looking at something other than your face, which is nice too.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to just remember is that they're improvising. They're kind of making this up as they're going along as well. So, it's going to be a little bumpier than usual, and it's harder to communicate with the control room because you don't have the squiggly in your ear. You don't have the microphone on that you traditionally use to talk to the folks who are producing the segment. And so, sometimes all you can do is talk to the Skype, and sometimes that doesn't work perfectly.
Right. That is true. And I do think that's why you need to allow yourself more time to really practice. And I would do a mock interview with someone ahead of time. There's a fine balance because you never want to sound rehearsed.
Right.
That's not good TV.
I think you need to be comfortable.
Right. So it's hitting that balance. And also in this time, something I know that is a pet peeve of shows, often, if you're very eager, you're like, thanks for having me right away.
Right.
Actually eating into your own segment time, save that for the end. Unless you read it and it's totally different with the host, but most hosts prefer that you do that at the end. And, we were talking about the time being much more limited earlier. If you're only going to speak once, you don't want to cut the 15 seconds away by thanking them, at the beginning.
Yeah. You don't want to waste you don't want to say, thanks so much for having me. And then they cut away to a press conference on the other side of the country and that's it. You're done. I think that's good advice. Keep the pleasantries for the end, unless you read the host and they expect something different.
One last thing is just never let the clip sit, make sure that you're pushing that out on social channels where appropriate or emails to stakeholders. I think going on TV is an amazing opportunity and you're getting a lot of eyeballs that way, but don't let it just sit there. Make sure you're pushing that clip out and using that as part of your, external comm efforts.
Totally. The appearance itself is in some ways the beginning of the effort, not the end.
Right.
All right. Well, that's it for today. Thanks so much to Molly for joining me. I'm Michael Steel. And as always, thanks for listening to HPS Insights and have a great day. Stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Insights podcast, produced by Hamilton Place Strategies. For the latest updates, follow us on Twitter at HPS Insight and visit us on the web at hamiltonplacestrategies.com.